Hi, I'm Michelle the Irritable Vegan. I'm here to share my vegan, low FODMAP story and hopefully take some of the BS out of IBS. And today is part 2 of my What's in My Kitchen series. If you missed part 1, I'll leave some links in the description box and across the top here. But basically part 1 was all about pantry staples such as grains, legumes and starches. I got so carried away with the footage that I needed to chop it into 2 halves. So today's video is the second part of that footage. So please excuse the sloppy editing, but there was so much valuable information here that I really didn't want to reshoot it all. In today's video, we're going to concentrate on flavour without FODMAPs. So you'll see all of the herbs and spices that I use on a daily basis. I've also got some super secret superfoods for you and a quick run through of some basic low FODMAP kitchen equipment that I don't think you can do without. I really hope you enjoyed today's video. If you're anything like me, I love taking a sneaky peek into people's pantries and hearing how they're going to use those ingredients on a daily basis. Let's get into the video. So moving on to my very stylish herbs and spices here. These are pretty much the herbs and spices that I will use on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis. So let's just tackle the giant elephant in the room. I use turmeric in everything. This is organic turmeric powder. It's really high quality, and not only do I tend to use this in a lot of cooking, everything from porridges to smoothies to turmeric lattes to flavouring for pretty much everything I cook, curries, chilies, stir fries, soups, anything like that. But I also make my own really high quality golden paste for the dog. Unfortunately, she has had a cancer removed in the past and some of her tumours have returned. So since I've started using this for her as the golden paste, I've definitely noticed that the tumours appear to have stopped growing and she's doing fantastically well in herself. So this is something that I always have on hand, and I always insist that it has to be the organic, really high quality. And as you may probably notice in some of my cooking videos, my fingers do always tend to look a little bit yellow, my fingers and nails, and that is, as I say, because I'm either making the golden paste and feeding the golden paste to the dog 3 times a day, or I'm using turmeric in pretty much everything I cook. So yeah, I'm afraid we do tend to have the little tinge going on. I even use it in a homemade face scrub, so big turmeric fan. Something else we've got here is the Himalayan pink salt. I do like this. I do find, for whatever reason, to me it does taste saltier than regular table salt, so I find that you need to use much less of this than you would a normal white table salt. But I really like this, and again, not only do I use this for cooking, but I also use it in face scrubs and body scrubs, so I've usually always got quite a large amount of this on hand. Garam masala, again, that's something that I do tend to add to a lot of things. One of the things that I haven't ever really been able to find is a decent low FODMAP curry powder. So for me, I tend to use garam masala and then add in any other spices that I feel are lacking, particularly a chilli or a coriander, a ground coriander. So garam masala usually is the base of a lot of my curries. I tend to even put it in chilies. I quite like it sprinkled, a tiny little bit of it sprinkled in like a tofu scramble, and it's just pretty much got every spice in there that I'd normally use separately. So for me, it's just much more convenient to buy it as the garam masala. Something that's new to me since starting the low FODMAP diet is the asafoetida. I'd never used this before the low FODMAP diet, but I definitely recommend getting it if you haven't tried it. It really is. It gives quite a pungent onion / garlic aroma to whatever you're cooking. You do only need a really tiny amount, and that pretty much goes in everything I would usually put onion in, from risottos to chilies to curries. Pretty much everything gets a little sprinkle of that in, and I definitely feel it does add something. It's usually quite easy to find these days. This is the Sainsbury's one, but I have had it from all the major supermarkets before. You usually only need a very small amount of it to give you that little bit of pungency that is usually missing from the onion and the garlic. Chinese 5 spice is another thing that I tend to like. You can guarantee that if I'm not using garam masala, I'll be using Chinese 5-spice. And again, this goes in soups, fried rice, noodle dishes. I like to put it in any kind of like noodle soups or anything like that. So that's another handy one. And then just for a little bit different, I also have a tikka curry powder here. I actually much prefer this if I'm going to make a dish with like a yoghurt, so I'll stir this through into yoghurt. Sometimes I'll do it for like a dressing, maybe like a chickpea salad or something like that, but more often than not I'll use this with a bit of yoghurt and lemon juice, and I'll marinate tofu in it or vegetables in it and roast them up. So that's something a little bit different. Smoked paprika and liquid smoke are two things that I use pretty constantly. The smoked paprika I can pretty much guarantee I'm going to use on a daily basis. The liquid smoke not as much, but that's quite nice to use in marinating tofu, in trying to get a kind of meaty, smoky, barbecue, bacon type flavour, which again, as I say, is good for using with tofu, using with aubergine. Anything that you're trying to bring that kind of flavour out, then I'll use the liquid smoke. I do think it's quite expensive. I think I paid about £3 for that, which for me is quite a lot of money, but it has lasted me a very, very long time, and there's still probably about a quarter of that left. You do only need a really tiny amount or it starts to taste really, really fake. So that's something worth looking into. And I would often use that in conjunction with, excuse the bottle. I'd often use that in conjunction with dark soy sauce, as I say, for marinades in Chinese style dishes. I think dark soy sauce is pretty much invaluable for adding that pungent, savoury flavour. And I do believe that soy sauce itself is fine on a low FODMAP diet, unless obviously that you're also wheat intolerant or if you suffer from celiacs, and then you do need the wheat-free tamari. But for most people that are just low FODMAP, rather than have any sensitivities purely to wheat and gluten, then this isn't suitable. Back to the smoked paprika. So I use this pretty much in everything, chilies, curries, you name it, I pretty much use it in there. Again, you only need a really tiny amount, but I do really think it adds that little bit of smokiness, that little bit of pungency that quite a lot of vegetable dishes do need. So this, again, is something that I'm pretty much never without. So I've got a general mixed Italian herbs there. That goes in everything from pizzas to pasta dishes. It's just your typical standard dried herbs: parsley, basil, oregano, thyme. So I use that in a lot of things. And also I've quite taken to using dill. I do think it's quite a nice addition to meals that are missing onion and garlic. I know that chives is usually the standard recommendation, and I do enjoy chives as well, but I just think dill adds a little bit of something extra. It's got a slight aniseed flavour, so I just think that adds a little bit of something. Ground cinnamon again is something that I'd use most often in porridge or in a breakfast dish, sometimes in smoothies. Chili powder, and I usually have cayenne pepper, but I don't seem to have any of that on hand at the moment. But chili powder and cayenne pepper, I can tolerate quite well. I know that's not the case for a lot of people, but I'm quite tolerant of heat and spice, so I do like to add a little bit of that into what I'm making. Black pepper goes without saying, that pretty much goes into everything, and I do prefer buying my own peppercorns and grinding it rather than buying it as a fine ground powder. I much prefer the aroma of it when you grind it yourself. I don't actually own a proper pepper grinder, so I tend to buy these ones that have the grinder attached, and obviously they're really a single-use product. I really need to get myself a proper pepper grinder, but they are pretty much a single-use product. But I tend to push it and push it and push it, and I'll refill them and refill them and refill them until I can start to see really fine cracks, and then I'll buy a new one. And during one of my videos, I think it was a stir-fry video, I'd obviously missed the fact that I'd kind of pushed my luck, and as I was grinding it into the food, the entire top exploded. Pepper. and the entire top of the grinder exploded and dumped the whole container of solid peppers into my meal. So that was an interesting day. Vegemite, love it or hate it. I love it. I can only eat a really tiny amount. I like this spread on toast. I also, if you've seen my how to drink more water video, you'll see that I also actually like to drink it, much to my husband's disgust. And I also sometimes like to put this in a sauce, again, maybe a chilli or a stew or something along those lines, something that would traditionally have meat in it. I quite like to use a really, really small amount of that. My husband hates it, so I can only ever use a really tiny amount. If it gets to the point where he can taste it, then it's game over. So I do sneak a little bit of that in now and then, but I tend to also just use that in dishes that I'm just eating myself. And one last thing is coriander seeds. I absolutely love these things. Just the smell of them is absolutely divine. I detest coriander leaf. I'm one of those freaky people that cannot eat coriander leaf. I think it just ruins everything it comes into contact with. But coriander seed, I think, is absolutely delicious. I love coriander seed. I love cooking with coriander seed. And again, I do like to buy the whole seed and actually grind it into the meal as I want it. And I think that's where you get the best flavour and the best aroma from it. And again, that goes into curries, soups. Something like coriander seeds, it just adds that little punch of flavour that you might feel you're lacking a little bit on the low FODMAP meal. So I think that's pretty much all my spices and herbs. I forgot to show these when I was showing my herbs and spices. Nutritional yeast, every vegan's favourite staple. I use this all the time in everything. If you haven't tried it, I do really recommend that you give it a try. Please make sure you get the savoury vegan yeast flakes, which are the ones that you use for eating. This isn't the type of yeast you will buy in the bakery section. This isn't the type of yeast you would buy to bake bread or anything like that. So please make sure you're getting the right product. It usually looks almost a little bit like fish food, like golden flakes. It smells a little bit cheesy, a little bit eggy, and it does usually come in quite big tubs like this, as opposed to the type of yeast that you use for baking, which usually comes in very small tubs. So that's usually a good indicator of whether you've picked up the right thing or not. If you haven't tried it, I do recommend you give it a go, and then once you do decide that you can't live without it, then I highly recommend that instead of buying it a pack at a time from either your supermarket or your local health food shop, you can actually buy these in bulk on the internet and they work out much cheaper. So once you realise that you have to have this in your life, then it's much better for you if you can buy them in bulk. It's much cheaper, and this goes in everything, pretty much everything. I don't tend to like it sprinkled on top of things like a Parmesan cheese, which is how I've seen a lot of people use it. I do much prefer to incorporate it into sauces, and it still gives you that really nice cheesy, umami, savoury flavour, but without the flaky grittiness of the texture. So I'm not one for sprinkling this on everything, but I do use it in pretty much most stocks, sauces, soups, dressings, anything else like that I make. I pretty much make sure that's in there. And one of my secret ingredients, it's not more yeast flakes, but I keep it in here just because the packet doesn't seal very well, and that is black salt. Now this is a really random one that I bought off the internet, and the reason it's such a tiny packet is because I'd never had it before and I wasn't sure if I'd like it or if I'd use it. That was very silly of me because I actually use it in lots and lots of things. It is extremely pungent. It gives a real sulphurous, eggy flavour, so it's not something you would use or buy if you did not like the smell or the flavour of egg, because it is pure sulphuric salt. It doesn't look black, which I for some reason expect it to be black. It's actually a very pale pink colour. It looks like very finely ground pink Himalayan salt, but a little bit more powdery rather than granuled. And this is really good for using in chickpea mash, in homemade mayonnaise, in tofu. So I make a protein tofu sauce, which is kind of an eggy cheesy sauce. This is really fantastic in that it just gives you that little bit of flavour, that little bit of eggy pungent flavour, which you wouldn't get with anything else. This gives a flavour unlike anything else you will have in your kitchen. So it really is one of those things that you're either gonna love it or hate it, and that you would only use this if you were trying to recreate an egg-based flavour, say for in mayonnaise or in egg mayonnaise. But I just find it really useful, and it is pretty much my secret ingredient in most things that make my husband go, So this is my little magic pot of goodness, and that's why I hide it in there, to keep it safe. You do only need a really tiny amount. That has lasted me for months, and I do use it in quite a lot of things, but you do only need a really tiny amount because it is very pungent. And finally, moving on to a couple of things which are not pantry essentials, but they're things that I like to have on hand and use fairly regularly. So the first two of those is the cacao powder and the maca powder. Both of these go in my porridge pretty much every time I make it. I also like them in smoothies as an alternative to hot chocolate. It is the raw cacao powder rather than a cocoa powder, which can often contain milk powder, lots of sugar, blah. So this isn't, for anybody that's not used to cacao powder, this does not taste like cocoa or hot chocolate. This is purely the raw cacao. So it's more like a bitter dark chocolate, if you will, and you would need to add a sweetener such as the maple syrup, but it does add a really nice chocolatey bitter flavour to whatever you're having. You could stir this through milk, as I say, to make an alternative to hot chocolate. I put it in smoothies. You usually only use a teaspoon or so at a time, so it does last quite a long time. This actually was from Aldi. I'm not sure if they still do it because I've had this for quite a long time. It is actually labelled as vegan, but this was definitely the cheapest I'd ever seen it from Aldi. I think it was less than £2 for this pack. The last one that I had, which was some kind of raw, organic, all singing, all dancing, I think it was about £8 for probably about this quantity. So this was like less than £2. So it's definitely the cheapest place I've seen it, but I don't know if they stock it regular or if I just happened to look out when they did have it. And again, the maca powder. So this is one of those kind of superfoods which is known to be really stimulating. It's supposed to really give you an energy boost. It's a mild vanilla, probably like a mild vanilla essence, I would say. And again, you only need a teaspoon of this. Popped into your porridge, popped into smoothies. You could even add it when you were baking, if you were baking cakes and things, more for its kind of superfood element rather than for its flavour. It's not really something you particularly use, I don't think, for its flavour, but it's just nice to have the added vitamins and minerals and the just I like knowing that it's in there. So again, not an essential, but something that's really nice and can really add a little bit of something, particularly the cacao powder. Can really add a little bit of something if you're craving chocolate or sweetness. Chia seeds. I actually buy my chia seeds now from Aldi as well, but this was an old tub that I've had for a very long time. The Aldi chia seeds come in a packet more like this, and I just decant them into here each time I buy them. And I particularly just use these, again, sprinkled on cereal, sprinkled in my porridge, sprinkled in a smoothie. I'll sometimes sprinkle them onto a salad, but not very often. You can make egg replacer with them. It's a good low FODMAP vegan alternative to egg. I have never really had much success with that, so I do tend to use the powdered egg replacer. I know a lot of people, a lot of recipes do use it. I've seen a lot of people making their own homemade jam with chia seeds, and that's something I'd quite like to give a try of, but I haven't tried it just yet. And finally, I've got some sushi nori. I don't really make my own sushi very often. I keep intending to make it, so I will frequently buy this with the intention of making vegan low FODMAP sushi, but then it always gets used up in sauces, soups, stocks. I sometimes put a really tiny amount in a chickpea mash to make it a bit more like tuna mash rather than an egg mash, if that makes sense. So I do keep buying these fully with the intention of making the sushi, but never quite getting round to it. But as I say, I do think these add a really nice flavour to a noodle soup, something particularly that's very brothy, to a homemade stock. Just that little bit of fresh sea flavour that you don't really get with anything else. I did make a homemade tofu fish, like a tofish fillet, and I breadcrumbed it and put a thin layer of this underneath the breadcrumbs against the tofu, so that when you cut through the breadcrumbs, there was a layer of breadcrumbs, a layer of tofu, and then a tiny little thin sliver of this, and that was really, really quite pleasant. Again, not something that is an absolute staple, not the cheapest ingredient, but if you're really looking to experiment with your cooking, if you've been doing the elimination diet for a few weeks and you're looking to bring in some different flavours, and even for new vegans that are really looking to capture a bit of a fish or a seafood type flavour in a stock or a soup, even a risotto, then this works really, really nicely. Now, speaking of stock, just got a few little essentials. They're not food related, but they are things that I think are pretty much essential. So let's move over here and take a look at those. So I've moved you over to this corner of the kitchen just to show you a couple of the little essential tools that I like to have on hand all the time, which I use pretty much either on a daily or a weekly basis, and I find them pretty much invaluable in the kitchen. So the first one is filtered water. Now, this is something that I am quite new to. It's something I've been really, really conscious of since starting the low FODMAP diet, is my water intake. It can actually take hot or cold water, this one. So I tend to use it for filtering my water, but it can actually be used almost as a teapot. You can see it's got the really fine mesh filter in the top there. So you can use it, you could use it cold as an infused water. You can use it hot to make herbal teas. This just lives on our counter. It gets filled up every day. Once this is sat on the counter for 24 hours, the water in here then gets decanted into another jug which is kept in the fridge. That's the jug that we usually use from throughout the day. I use this for everything all day, every day. I could really do with another one of these, if I'm honest. I also give it to the dog, the cold one from the day before that's in the fridge, but I could probably do with another one of these. And I'm not sure if you can see in there my charcoal filter, but again, we decided to go natural with an all natural charcoal filter in there, and I must say the water is delicious. I can definitely taste a difference. I think it gives it a really, really pleasant, slightly sweet taste to the water. We're very lucky with the tap water in this country, but one thing I did notice as soon as I started using this, that there is absolutely no smell to this water. Unlike a lot of the times when you smell a glass of tap water, you can actually smell the chemicals in there. That is completely eradicated by using the charcoal filter. And in terms of flavour, I definitely think it makes for a really, really tasty, slightly marginally sweet. You wouldn't really notice it unless you tested them side by side, as I have many times, just to try and convince myself that it's not all in my head, and it really isn't. So this is definitely something that I recommend, and I would use this. I use this filtered water for everything. If I'm making a stock, I will always make sure I use filtered water. If I'm adding any water in to cooking, and obviously drinking water throughout the day. So this is invaluable. Speaking of stock, my trusty slow cooker back here. This is pretty much either always full of stock or just about ready to make a stock. You can see it's very well used, it's very well loved, but I have always either got stock permanently bubbling away in here, or the day after the stock has been made I'll have soup bubbling away in here. And if I haven't got the stock bubbling away in the slow cooker, then you can guarantee there is going to be a tub in the fridge full of all my vegetable peelings and trimmings ready to make a stock in a day or two's time. So this little trusty weapon here is definitely something that I wouldn't be without in the kitchen, particularly since going low FODMAP, not relying so much on any shop bought stocks. This is definitely something that I've found to be really, really valuable in the low FODMAP kitchen. Another little tool is my pestle and mortar, which weighs a ton, so I'm not going to hold it up for very long. Basically, the reason I really love this is because I really like getting my hands dirty. Oh, that noise. I really love getting down and dirty with my food. I really love getting my hands dirty, getting stuck in. I really like doing things by hand that a lot of people may choose to do with a piece of machinery, or I really like using my hands. So this for me, it satisfies that, but also I find that for making FODMAP quantities, so pretty much anything I'm going to make in terms of a pate, a pesto, in terms of anything like that, maybe a homemade dressing, the quantities for the low FODMAP diet are usually, I find, unsuitable for a food processor or a blender. They're just too small. The quantities are too small to be able to process them properly. So you either have to make quadruple the quantity, which if it's something new that you're experimenting with, you might not necessarily want to do because you don't know if you're going to enjoy eating it day after day after day. It might be something that's a little bit on the higher FODMAP side that you may be happy to have once but don't necessarily want to continue eating day after day after day. So I find a pestle and mortar is fantastic for being able to do really small individual portions of, I say, like pestos, pates, anything like that, chickpea mash, anything like that that you would usually typically use a blender for. When it comes to low FODMAP portions, I think a pestle and mortar is really, really useful. And finally, something that I would never ever be without in my kitchen is my iPad. And I know that sounds ridiculous. It's not an essential piece of kitchen equipment. It's something that I find absolutely essential. That's the indie products, by the way. I love the indie projects. There we are. Sorry, Theo and B, if you're watching. But yeah, I always, one of the reasons I think I get so much stuff done in the kitchen, and one of the reasons that I enjoy spending so much time in the kitchen, is that I permanently keep myself entertained. So I will either be listening to a podcast, I'll be listening to some music on Spotify, I'll be watching a YouTube video, I'll be listening to something on YouTube. I've always got something, unless I'm filming a video, unless I'm filming a recipe video, I've always got some kind of entertainment on the go, whether I'm washing up, cleaning, cooking. It's a really, really good way of multitasking. It's a really good way of getting yourself inspired. You can even put like a recipe video on there and follow along as you go with the recipe video. That's how I design a lot of my recipe videos, to be kind of followed along like that. But it's something that I really wouldn't ever be without in the kitchen ever again. We do have a really tiny kitchen. We don't have a TV in the kitchen. We do have a stereo, so often, particularly when my husband's cooking, he much prefers to listen to music, so we'll either have the music going, or if I'm cooking on my own, which is usual, then I've definitely always got the iPad on the go, and I've got, as I say, whatever on there just to keep me entertained, keep me motivated, and just help the time pass. And also, like I say, multitasking, catching up on podcasts, catching up on YouTube episodes, doing research for recipes. I find that a really invaluable piece now of my kitchen equipment. And I know that sounds ridiculous. I'm fully aware it's not a piece of kitchen equipment. I am fully aware that we've spent many years without the use of devices and things in the kitchen, and we've just got in the kitchen and got on with it. But for me, and particularly I think for anybody that's a new cook, anybody that's learning to cook, it's fantastic to be able to follow along with your recipes. Anybody that doesn't think they particularly enjoy cooking or finds spending time in the kitchen a chore, during a meal prep session, anything like that, I really do think it can be a source of entertainment, it can be a source of comfort, it can be a source of knowledge, it can encourage you to experiment, it can encourage you to stay longer in the kitchen than maybe you necessarily would have done without it there. So I think for that reason, I am very rarely without it in my kitchen. I know this has turned into a really long video, and I'm really sorry about that, but I just thought it might be really useful just to get a really good overview of exactly what is typically in my kitchen on a weekly, day-to-day basis. Like I've said, this is not a grocery haul. I wouldn't expect for you to rush out and buy all of these things all at once. Many of these things I've had for weeks. Some of the things such as the oils, the vinegars, the nuts, the pulses, I can have for months at a time. But it's just a really nice idea to see exactly what people keep on hand in their kitchens and exactly what constitutes the bulk of people's meals day after day after day. So I hope in that aspect it's been really helpful for you. Please leave any comments or questions down below. If you've got any questions about how I use any of these ingredients, if you've got any questions about starting up your own low FODMAP vegan kitchen for the first time, setting up your own pantry staples, anything like that, please leave them all in the comments box below. If you've enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and I'll speak to you all soon. Thanks for watching.